Just listen.
Yeah, if you read the words down here, it starts off with what's going on in the US is beyond disgusting. And I agree, but it's almost as disgusting as seeing this post and not being able to interact with it. You shouldn't be seeing things online if you can't interact with them. These kids are, by degrees, by extension, promoting censorship, which is patently fascist. You can assume otherwise. Oh, but she just doesn't want to put up with anybody's shit. Well, that's not how reality works. But on the DARPA internet, you can live in the land of make-believe. Just the same. Bigger points. If people knew what they were talking about, this shit wouldn't exist. ICE wouldn't exist. I keep asking people who are really fired up about this, do they know why? And this is important to appreciate too. The homeless and people that have been deemed quote unquote quote unquote illegal are in the crosshairs. And not one of these superficial internet babies has been able to answer the question. The answer is neither of those people pay unconstitutional taxes. Something else that would not exist if you and I were surrounded by smart people willing to do the right thing. Let me cut to the chase in a big way. Nothing is for the people by the people, and it hasn't been since 1871. Okay? In terms of unconstitutional taxes, 1913, that's when the Federal Reserve was established under the pretense of being both voluntary and temporary. And it's still voluntary. It was never meant to be temporary. And hopefully I said that correctly. The only reason it exists is because most people out there, which lends itself to why I'm complaining about this post, do not know what they're talking about and they're not willing to do the right thing. Once again, nothing is for the people by the people. Why would the homeless and people who have been deemed, quote unquote, illegal, be in the crosshairs, for not paying unconstitutional taxes? Because our masters are locking things down and tightening the noose. Now that sounds really flowery, but what's really going on is citizens became debt slaves in 1913 when the Federal Reserve was established under the pretense of being both voluntary and temporary. What I told you is relevant to this. Dating back to 1913. Can you connect the dots? Can you tell me where I'm going with this? Probably not, because you're not involved, which means you're not invested, which means you don't have a fucking clue what's going on, which means you are the problem, which is why things are getting worse. And it's why things like this are happening. These things are connected. It's a symbiotic system. Your poor choices impact me, and vice versa. So if you're not terribly bright, you're not terribly clever, and you're not willing to do the right thing, you're going to fuck things up for yourself and anybody you know, like, and love, including me and other people you'll never meet. To spell it out for you, where we're going is citizens as debt slaves, which was established again in 1913 because all currency has no standard. There's no gold standard. There's no silver standard. There's no standard. It's a debt-based system. You and I are the value. The debt we accrue is quite literally the value we put in because we are the value. That's how it works. That's why we have straw men and why it's traded, why we are traded and why we have social security numbers, why it's traded on the stock exchange, and why you don't have access to that account. In other words, you're generating money for other people and you have no access to it. Where we're going with this is debt slaves are soon to be converted into social credit slaves, which is in the programming again and again and again. It's everywhere you look. Here's an example. Superficial internet babies, because you probably bought into it and you didn't think about it. You ever seen somebody being verified online? Have you seen a big push to be verified on the DARPA internet? I want you to appreciate how long the internet's been in existence and the fact that being verified wasn't something that it started out doing. In other words, people got on just fine. You didn't need to do that. Just like all the other things I complain about. When you scroll, you should be able to scroll. It shouldn't present you any lag. It shouldn't resist you. And it definitely shouldn't drag you back to the top of the stack the moment you look away and you're slightly distracted. The only reason it would do that is if it was a divisive social engineering tactic to retrain your brain and spoon feed you the latest propaganda at the top of your feed, which is a slush pile. Has that ever dawned on you? Probably not. It's still relevant to what I'm complaining about, because the more often that garbage happens and you are, susceptible, you're part of it, you're experiencing it, the dumber and dumber and dumber people will become, including yourself and me and fill in the blank. We are being manipulated on a daily basis concerning anything that's connected to Wi-Fi, for lack of better words. And that's just on the DARPA internet. So people are being verified because this is the groundwork. This is things being normalized. Anything that's well-financed and well-circulated is normalized. And in this case, our masters are doing so to train you to buy into social credit slavery, to accept it. Another aspect of this is communism. You see a big push for that garbage today, and I do mean garbage. Bear in mind, democracy is a shade of fascism, if you haven't figured that out. Once again, nothing is for the people, by the people, and it hasn't been since 1871. I'm telling you something, by the way, but you probably can't Google most of it. I just got sidetracked because I stood up. Pardon me. Because people should know these things, and people don't know these things. I lost my train of thought with that last bit. Social credit slavery, we're working towards it. Here, I'll give you a couple examples of other things that were rolled out. This goes back to 2023. July 2023, I complained about this at length, and nobody gave a shit. And it was censored on platforms like, TikTok, which is China Talk. Now it's Zionist Talk. YouTube is exclusively Zionist Talk, in case you don't know what I'm talking about. And if you assume the worst of me, I should also rattle this off. I'm pro-Palestine. I'm not anti-Semitic. And that's a pun through and through, but it's also absolutely true. The earthly abomination that is Israel would not exist, and most of you probably don't know what it represents. If you look up at night, that's what it represents. It also touches on what I was going to complain about, and I'm glad that just came back to me. I got too many things going on. Sorry. I was going to tell you about communism. I was going to tell you that Hitler openly stated that the Nazi flag represents communism. And I was going to tell you that the Nazi Party, which were a bunch of bags of garbage, which happened to use that sigil that I was just talking about, when you look up at the night sky, the Nazi Party was rebranded communism, the Communist Party, which means nobody would ever support communism. Not to mention, if you just consider communism, it's garbage. It's absolute garbage. Only somebody who is terribly gullible would buy into and repeat. Now, I just lost my other train of thought where I was going with the other bit. Back to July 2023. So July 1st of 2023, okay, and this is the month where people were waxing poetic about a lizard person on a plane. They were waxing poetic about a news story about the Titan sub going missing, approximately around this time frame. And that might have happened in August. I can't remember. And the other one was Mel Gibson's, The Sound of Freemasons, which finances human trafficking and stars a pedophile named Jim such and such. If you watch the movie, he flat out tells you in there, it's lesser magic, never trust a pedophile. And yeah, it's pretty on the nose. But what do I know? So July 1st, 2023, something known as FedNow was rolled out, and it was introduced as voluntary. Imagine that word again, to the central banks, essentially, the central bank system. So they could choose to opt in, for lack of better words. And if they did, it wouldn't benefit them, but the majority of the major banks did so. FedNow, look it up. During the same month, July 2023, on the 24th, WorldCoin began testing with a digital incentive. This is the groundwork for social credit slavery, just to be clear. And a bunch of unassuming duds bought into it because, I'm going to get some free digital coins, and they did so. These are people who are working against you and I. And that was 2023. That should unnerve you. But most of you probably don't care. I mean, life is short. We can only do so much, but I encourage you to encourage others to pull their head out of their ass and look around. What the fuck do I know? I'm trying to help you. Meanwhile, I should be able to interact with this post. It's ridiculous. Often I state our master's methods aren't terribly clever, but they are effective because most people are good people, which means they're gullible as the day is long. This is the same song and dance. I'm not saying somebody wasn't harmed, and they certainly shouldn't have been. They certainly shouldn't have been. Nobody's fucking illegal. That's a phony jurisdiction in place to subjugate the masses, and most people have bought into it to one degree or another. What I'm driving at is, if you remember George Floyd, who he wasn't a good guy, but he didn't deserve to die that way. He got a bunch of people fired up. They tore the city apart. They screamed at the sky. At least here in Portland, they did. And it served no purpose by and large. People made money on t-shirts and other things like that. And most of the groups here in town that were circulating that garbage, they were not grassroots. Some of them were actually CIA. I shit you not. There was only one grassroots, wholesome family of black folk who got behind that and rallied behind that here in town. And they didn't tear apart the city, just to be clear. But the other kids did. What do I know? Our masters are pulling the same fucking stunt again. You create a martyr, you get people behind a cause, you point them in a direction and you tell them, kill. And morons run out the door, band together, and become the angry villagers at the door and do as they're told. For lack of better words, this is what's happening right now. It's the same song and dance. And one of the common denominators is the steward of the District of Columbia, you probably think of superficially as Donald Trump, the president. He happened to be in office during that garbage too. People rarely think, typically they react, assume I'm wrong. I did want to mention George Floyd was, he had a rap sheet, and part of the reason I said he wasn't a good guy is because of aggravated assault. Again, nobody should die that way, though. Just the same. What was the other bit I was going to rattle off? Usually people say, think for me because I'm unwilling and or incapable of doing so on my own, and that's really flowery and long-winded. What I'm driving at is, what should we be doing? People, for one, should know what they're talking about. Google is a tool of propaganda because we're using the DARPA internet and we're using free social media. These are all red flags. But you can connect the dots if you put in the time. That's what I wasted my 30s on, among other things. You could do this, but most people aren't involved, which means they're not invested, which means they effectively work for the people that they're complaining about. Once again, good people tend to be gullible as the day is long. They're trusting, is what I'm saying. And that tracks if you think about it instead of reacting. So, when people squeal at me, what do we do? Well, for one, you need to know what you're talking about. You have to put in the time, and you're going to get it wrong more often than you're going to get it right. If you're not willing to do that, you're truly not invested, which means you're not involved, which means you are the problem if you're just reacting. That's not going to end well. Think about it. Just think about executing a project, trying to, put together a project. If you're not going to think it through, you're probably going to fuck it up. Would you agree? It stands to reason if you think about it. But again, are you reacting or are you thinking? People got to band together after sorting some of this stuff out and then challenge others. Because if you can't challenge yourself, you can't challenge others. And if you haven't been able to do either of those things and you're not willing to do either of those things, you're not willing to rock the boat, once again, you're not invested, you're not involved, you are the fucking problem. Make no mistake of that. And most people are. Now, only if people figured out what's going on and what reflects reality, how we've been manipulated and what's propaganda, in other words, they have to have eyes to see, could they challenge themselves. Afterwards, then they would have to challenge people they know, like, and love. And really, toss their hat into the ring, which most people aren't going to do because they're afraid of rocking the boat. They're afraid of losing people. And most people will systematically reject you. They will reject you. I'm speaking from experience. They will kick your ass to the curb for making sense because they want to continue marching in lockstep with their horse blinders on. They want to play make-believe. And that should terrify you because those are the people that are fucking everything up for you and I. Through and through. So after you challenge yourself and you challenge others, you got to get them on board with this too. You got to get them to pull their head out of their ass, look around and understand what's what. So after we would accomplish that much, which is highly unlikely, which is why we're behind the 8 ball in the first place, because our masters got us through convenience and entertainment. And most people out there assume they don't have masters, despite the fact that if you want to get a job here in the States, you have to sign a W-2, which is absolutely unconstitutional and ridiculous. You're consenting to allowing somebody else to take a portion of your hard work that you're never going to meet, which means you're putting bread on somebody else's table, which means you have masters. It's a fact. But people will still refute it. So if you do these things, you run through these steps, right? You pull your head out of your ass. You put in the time to understand what reflects reality. You challenge yourself. Then you challenge others. Then you band together with like-minded people who aren't bags of meat, and you organize a plan outside of Wi-Fi, outside of a digital format, outside of an electronic format, because all of this is a surveillance tool and this shit's being cataloged on servers, I shit you not. Then you'd have to execute this plan and see that, you're successful. There's more to this, of course, but there's no reason to ever leave any of that on the DARPA internet. But people aren't doing this. Instead, they're doing what I highlighted today in this post. And as you can see, plain as day, there's a Molotov cocktail and a ponytail. Ponytail's neither here nor there. That could be a dude for all I know here in, yuppie Portland. But it wouldn't suggest, putting together a Molotov cocktail with a little man bun or a ponytail. You might light your hair on fire.
Llegó el bachatero. Dale para atrás usted también. Dice Alessandra, nunca me deja. Dale para atrás, amigo. Yo sabía. Dale para atrás, amigo. Déjame el paso de cebra libre para que la gente pueda pasar. Dale para atrás. Todo el espíritu de que se pare mal, lo reprendemos en este momento. Reprendemos todo el espíritu de pararse mal. Lo reprendemos. Todo el espíritu. Dale para atrás, que eso es para la gente. Dale para atrás, que eso es para la gente. No, que dale para atrás, que eso es para la gente. Eso es para la gente. Si tú quieres, no obligado. La vida no es fácil, Giuseppe. La vida no es fácil, es uno que la pone difícil. Tú poniendo la difícil en el paso de cebra ahí. Dale para atrás. Dale para atrás, dale para atrás, dale para atrás, dale para atrás, para atrás, es para atrás que le den, para atrás, para atrás.